I invite you to turn in the front of your Grow, Pray study guide where the scripture for today is at the top. Our scripture comes from Romans 8, verses 12 through 17. Hear now these words from Paul's writing. So then, brothers and sisters, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs. Heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I don't know how big of a secret this is. Some people may know this already, maybe not one of the most known things about me. I know that many of you know that I do not like my food to touch. I receive at least once a month a plate that is divided from someone in the congregation. I got 2 of them 3 weeks ago from the same person. So I have some at my house and I have some here in the office, and there may be a couple in my van just in case, we get stuck somewhere. That's a buffet, and I can sneak my own plate that's divided into that. That's something most of you probably already know, but I don't know if you know this. I love to cook. It's one of the things that brings me great joy in life. And not only do I love to cook, I love cookbooks. I love cookbooks. The only books that you will find on my bedside table are cookbooks. It's not that I don't read other things, but I love to flip through a cookbook and thumb down really good, some of you are nodding, thumb down those really good recipes that I find right before I go to bed. It helps me dream sweet dreams. I can spend hours on Pinterest, down the rabbit hole of recipes and food. I have splatter-stained recipes from my grandmother's recipe box that she passed down to me. It's her legacy in our family to pass on her recipes. And as a child, I learned to cook by standing with her. But that legacy skipped a generation. My mom did not inherit that legacy. She was not a good cook. And she admitted it, so I'm not telling stories out of school here. But she kind of had to learn to cook on her own because she wasn't interested in it when she was growing up. So when I was young, we had very often wonderful, delightful meals of honey glazed spam in our kitchen, and a lot of box dinners. And I used to think, how could homemade brownies be any better than box brownies? I mean, come on. They just couldn't be. Until I tried the recipe that makes it with butter instead of oil. And I'll never, ever go back to making boxed brownies. But even if you're not a great cook, you probably already, or you're not that interested in cooking, you probably know that there are recipes and then there are recipes. Beef bourguignon, that's a complex recipe. But brownies, I would put that in the basic recipe category. That is until the Pentagon got a hold of brownies. Some of you may already know by your veiled laughter that several years ago, the Pentagon famously wrote a 26-page brownie recipe. 26 pages. All cut to military specifications. And if you want to see the whole document, all you got to do is Google Pentagon brownie recipe, and you can read the whole thing. But I'll just share with you just a couple of items. 3.2.6. Whole eggs may be liquid or frozen and shall have been processed and labeled in accordance with the regulations governing the inspection of eggs and egg products. The whole eggs shall be egg white and egg yolks in their natural proportions, as broken directly from shell eggs, as evidenced by the USDA Egg Products Inspection Certificate. Has anyone ever seen this certificate? Use the word for the USDA. Section 4.5.1.1. Get ready. Conformance of ingredients and components to identity, condition, and other requirements specified in 3.2 shall be certified by the ingredient supplier or ingredient manufacturer, and compliance shall be verified by examination of pertinent labels, markings, U.S. grade certificates, certificates of analyses, or other such valid documents acceptable to the inspection agency. If necessary, each ingredient shall be examined organoleptically or inspected according to generally recognized test methods, such as the standard methods described in the official methods of analysis of the Association of Analytical Chemists and in the approved methods of the American Association of Cereal Chemists, to determine conformance to the requirements. Any non-conformance to an identity, condition, or other requirement shall be cause for rejection of the ingredient or component lot or of any involved product. That's not even one whole page of this 26-page document. I mean, whatever happened to throw some eggs and flour and cocoa powder and butter into a bowl, mix it together, dump it in the pan, and stick it in the oven? Bam, brownies. I think the Pentagon must have had someone who could take something and make it even more convoluted. Maybe say someone named Paul, who was in charge of their recipe. Paul, the beloved apostle. He is beloved. Man, can he be confusing. He is really confusing sometimes to read, and sometimes it seems like he's intentionally confusing. He will go on and on for a paragraph and mix metaphor after metaphor after metaphor, and he leaves us often wondering, is there a system in this theology that he's trying to give us, or is he just more interested in pastoring churches in individual places that have individual challenges? No doubt it can be difficult to follow Paul's stream of thought, like it is difficult trudging through a 26-page brownie recipe. But I admit, even though difficult, there are places in Paul's writing that just cannot be taught. They are beautiful and wonderful, and they draw us to them. And I think today's reading from Romans is one of those passages. It's like Paul is writing us a recipe for family life. How do you make a family? Well, there are many recipes out there, but Paul gives us this faithful recipe, a recipe that comes from the first Christian church cookbook. Put flesh on the shelf and take up the spirit. This is not the kind of dualistic thinking that some people might go to when they hear these words. That's why it can be confusing. Paul's not saying spirit good, body bad. It's a reminder that on our own, left to to ourselves, we can be tempted toward things that don't sustain, that don't thrive, that in fact can lead to death. Paul's not talking about flesh that adheres to our bones. Flesh is a metaphor here for our tendency to seek and possess the things that bring immediate satisfaction without regard for a spiritual perspective. But Paul says if we live in the Spirit, if we let our lives be guided by the Spirit of God, we are moving toward fullness of life. Because Christians belong to Christ and have God's Spirit dwelling in us. We live neither in the flesh nor according to the flesh, Paul says. Rather, we live in the Spirit and we conduct our lives according to the Spirit. And by the Spirit dwelling in us, we are, therefore, children of God. And God will not guide us towards slavery or some kind of fear. God will always guide us toward freedom, toward promise, as we live in the Spirit. And as we live in the Spirit, we are adopted, Paul says, into God's family. It's a crucial part of the recipe here. We are so close to God in this adoption that we can cry, Abba, Father, in our prayers. And this is not some formal expression. I had a friend in college who called his dad Father all the time. It was very formal. And I noticed that their relationship also was formal. This may not be the case for everyone who uses that word, but this word Abba is so intimate. It's more like daddy. It's more like a term that a child would say to a parent when they're in a time of need. And I think we usually think of kids saying that term, daddy. And I think that way myself. And often when I was young, I called my dad Daddy. And then I moved. I'm Southern, so it probably stayed Dad instead of Father. But every now and then I notice I slip back into Daddy, even in my 40s and early 50s. But as I reflect back, it's the times in my life when I felt vulnerable that I found I slipped back to use that most intimate of term in speaking to him or calling out to him. Adoption by God brings us close enough to use the most intimate word with God. And so Paul says we are children of God, and not just children, we are heirs of God, joint heirs also with Christ, which means Jesus becomes our eldest brother. We become family together. I don't think there's a more beautiful image for God's love for us than this one of adoption. Maybe you know someone who's been adopted, or maybe you yourself have been adopted. I have a close friend named Beth who was adopted, and when she was younger, her parents did not even try to hide it from her. They used the word adoption regularly, but as a young child, she didn't really know what that word meant, what baggage could come with that word, until she was in second grade, and there was another student in her class that learned she was adopted, and that student knew how to hurt her with that word by saying to her, "You're not a real child. You're not a real child because your parents are not your real parents." And so she was teased that day and went home in tears for the first time. And when her mom asked her what was going on, she told the story. "I'm not a real kid. I'm not a real child. Because I was adopted, you adopted me." But her mother knew better. She took her into her arms and she said, "Honey, don't you know that all those other kids, their parents had them and they didn't have any choice of what kind of kid they would get. but we got to choose you because you're so special. The years went by and the pain of that teasing went away, and Mary Beth began to feel so stabilized by being adopted. But she never quit asking her mom to tell her that story of her adoption. And her mother never tired of saying to her again and again, we chose you. We chose you. You know, it reminds me that each week when we come and we gather in this place, we tell the stories of our family, our adopted family. We tell the stories of God, and we tell the faith stories from the Bible and from our ancestors. And maybe sometimes it strikes us as repetitious, but you know, I heard Kinsley say to me this morning that her favorite time of year is Advent. And we read the same scriptures over and over again during Advent. It's repetitious, but it's repetitious in a way that a favorite song is repetitious, or a gesture of love is repetitious, or communion at the table is repetitious. These stories of our faith family, they don't entertain. They do something far deeper. They sustain. They don't inform. They form us. They form us for a life of faithfulness. Who told you? Who told you for the first time the stories of God or Jesus? The stories of faith. For many of us, it was our parents. But it wasn't for my mother because her parents did not go to church. So when she was 5 years old, she dressed one Sunday morning and walked next door to her Aunt Vera's house and said, will you take me to church with you? And she began going weekly to her Aunt Vera's church. And that is where my mother, for the first time, heard those family stories. It's where she learned about God's love, and it's where she was baptized out back behind the church in the river. It's where she was adopted into the family of that church. Loved by people who chose her, who committed themselves to care for her and love her. They made her a part of their legacy. This is what we do in church when we bring a child before the congregation to offer a blessing for it. We're not just blessing that child and that child's parents who come. We are committing ourselves to adopting that child and their parents, not just in the cute, sweet baby years, but when it gets tough and when it gets hard. We're committing that we will be together in intimate ways to share life, even when it is so difficult. When you think about your early years in the church, whether you were a child or whether you came to church in later years of your life, but your early days in church life, who is it that comes to your mind as your adopted family? Who chose you? Who cared for you? Who taught you of God's love? Who was it that gave you a share in the work of the church? We have inherited a legacy of love. We've been given an equal share as joint heirs with Christ. In the Spirit, we are adopted by God. And it is quite a legacy. It's not like an inheritance, though, of any other kind. It's not like an inheritance that we can put in our pockets and keep to ourselves or put in the bank so that it will earn some kind of interest. This is an inheritance that if we do those things, we squander it. The only way our inheritance grows is for us to give it away. It's for us to share it. It's for us to bring other people to it, to be a part of it. And it's an inheritance that must be spread. Because we have been adopted into this great family, it is like none other. It's our legacy of love. And we've been given responsibility for it. May we be careful stewards of this legacy of God's love. Would you pray with me? Abba, Father, led by your Spirit, as family together with you and Christ our brother, may we be faithful stewards of your precious legacy of love. Amen.